Hey guys, welcome back to Hyperfocus. Today we are talking about design systems. We had some great guests on the show before, but today I'm talking with Paul about that topic because he actually worked on some pretty cool projects and they were all about design systems. So let's do it.
Add it up.
Hey Paul, good to have you.
Hey Jan,
on our show.
Good to be here. Thanks for the intro.
Yeah, I mean we're hanging around all day anyway, so it's actually not that special that we sit together and talk.
We know each other, right?
But in front of the camera, it feels always different. So, design systems. You worked on some also very big projects, and that's why we sit together now and talk about it. So I think just to give a brief intro, because people have seen your face a lot of times, but they might not know a lot about you. So you are in the industry for more than 20 years now?
That's correct, yes.
That's correct.
I've been around a while.
Yeah, I mean, you started like a lot of people in the creative industry as a graphic designer, then also worked a lot in branding, but the last, let's say 5 to 10 years, you are also always involved in big digital projects.
I'd say more like the last 15 years.
15 years?
Well, maybe the last 12 years or so, yeah.
Okay, so you definitely have some experience. And I think the topic of design systems is actually, it was not there all the time. It just developed, I would say, during the last 5 years?
Yeah, I think like design systems were around, but they were not necessarily classed as design systems. And I think as a designer, I mean, there's different types of designers, right? There's the super creative, and then there's the logical, right? And I think when you're going into like full production mode, you have to put on your logical hat. And I think some designers are good at that and other designers are not. And I think the closest comparison, we've discussed this as well, that I can think to when I first came in touch with what a design system could be, is creating certain reusable patterns, right? And this would be in way back when we were doing like a lot of print production, and you'd be working in InDesign, for example, and you're basically setting styles within InDesign. So you have this kind of global palette of tools that you create, so or styles that you create, from typography to colors, and everything is linked, let's say, globally, right? And so it's much easier to edit things, right? So I think this is almost like a precursor to the digital age, when we actually borrowed a lot from those ideas and actually translated those into what has become kind of design systems from a very basic level. So I think they've been around for a long time, but more recently we start to kind of categorize it in a different way.
Mm-hmm. To just get one step back, because I think a lot of people might heard the term design system, but have not really an idea what does it actually mean. Do you have like a very briefly definition of what a design system is?
Well, to put it into like layman's terms, what I was describing is what we'd refer to as like a pattern library somewhat. So those are the tools. And in old school terms, a guideline would be your design system, right? So what we now refer to as a central point of truth is a place where everything lives, okay? And instead of it being inside, let's say, a PDF, it lives within a digital space, right? And a design system is much more like a living thing, a living style guide, let's say. And a design system really is an idea. It needs a lot of people to be committed to all working together for the same destination, and be willing to kind of invest and re-look at something as it perpetually grows. And I think it's a hard thing to grasp, especially if you're trying to implement something like this into within like a management level, because often we gauge things on instant results, right? So how far can we get with something, and what's going to be the outcome at this point, at this point, at this point, because it's tangible. You can put a price on it, right? With a design system, it's something that you're in for the long haul, right? It's a lot of documentation, it's a lot of decision making, it's a lot of alignment. Okay, so on the surface there's design, but as you get deeper, there's a lot of infrastructure involved. I mean, the term design operations, design ops, is actually over the last couple of years become an actual role. You know, it's become a name which never really existed before, and it's because of design systems. And design ops are the people who make sure that design systems are being moved on an operational level. And those are normally designers who are really good at being able to work with developers and other key members of the design system.
Okay. So let's make this whole thing also a bit more tangible. We can actually talk about like a real project you did for so I think I don't know, it's like 4 years ago now you started as a design lead for Deutsche Bahn, which is the German railway company. It's like owned by the government. It's huge. It's like they have more than 300,000 employees and like a yearly turnover from $40 billion. So it's a big company. I think it's also important to know that design system, the bigger the company, the more there's a need for an actual design system.
Yeah.
So how did this project start, and what was the motivation? Did you already get in there and know, okay, we will build a design system, or what was the intention in the first place?
No, not really. But if I just kind of backtrack just really quickly, just to give some context of how I approach things. So I'd first realized how beneficial a design system could be working on a project called Funk, which if you're in Germany you may know this. It's from ARD and ZDF. It's a youth, digital youth platform for pushing content creators, and it's like within Germany it was, or I suppose is, one of the first ones to actually be government funded and actually pushed. So it's a very, very cool thing. But even then we were thinking about systematic design, and it was just natural because we needed to think about the bigger picture and how that would be continued after we'd finished developing the product and the brand, right? So we needed something that could be handed off. And then I worked for Smart as well, we're building a product, but we started to implement the same kind of thinking from the beginning. And it allowed us to be very lean and very agile very quickly. So this was already there in the toolbox of how to approach something, but design systems were only just starting to enter the vocabulary, really. So there's a little bit of backtrack there, just about how I came into contact with it and how it's used. But when I first came onto the Deutsche Bahn project, I was brought on and asked to be part of a very diverse team who could rethink the way that digital products are actually built. Deutsche Bahn is a huge company, and there's a lot of red tape inside of a big company like this. And when you want to try and create something that is lean, which was the actual purpose, what we were trying to do is to create an environment that we could create products that were first to market and are lean and quick. Red tape doesn't help, right? So like even the idea of tooling becomes an issue. So in the beginning, this was our objective, was to create a space where we could create things very, very quickly. So there was no design system at the beginning. It was just, this is what we need to do. So how do we do that? That was the kind of initial starting point for this project.
And at what point did you realize, okay, we actually are building a design system, or that's what we need to do, or that what makes sense at this point?
Well, design systems only make sense at a certain point, okay? Because they shouldn't get in the way of creativity, and they shouldn't get involved they shouldn't get in the way of productivity. And when you're testing things and iterating on things, the design system gets in the way, right? A design system is iterative, but it needs time. It needs to be built, and then it needs to be nurtured. But in the first instance, you do not need to be defining anything, right? Because if you're working and building lean prototypes and trying to understand what you're doing, then it's only going to hinder you and slow you down. So in the first instance, that makes no sense I think on any project really, to have a design system from the beginning. But it makes sense to think towards the future, to think, okay, what I'm doing now will have a direct impact on what will happen later on when we actually make some really big decisions. What does that mean, you know? How can we then start to possibly use the designs that we're creating and actually make some kind of logical pattern out of them when it comes to the design?
Okay. And how does a team constellation look like? Or what would you say is the perfect constellation of people and roles when you want to build a system like this?
Well, I mean, first of all, you need to get there, right? So, I mean, the question also was, when, right, did we decide to build a design system, right? So you have to actually go through the process, okay? And we realized that we needed something because it was easier than re-explaining things over and over and over again, right? So very, very simple, a primary button and a secondary button, okay? It can be labeled, but maybe it has a certain function, right? Or a certain behavior, okay? If this is documented, it's much easier for you to be able to hand that over to a developer. And this goes with anything, right? So at some point when you're creating reusable components or elements that are kind of a bit more kind of fixed, you see the patterns emerging. This is when it makes sense to have a precursor to a design system. And this is when you can start to hand things over. To answer your question about what's the perfect setup, I don't know if there's a perfect setup, to be honest, because design systems are changing and they're evolving and developing. And design systems can, I think, become too big and become out of control. And too many people with too many opinions stop the process of a design system actually evolving and growing. I think what Spotify did was really interesting because Spotify built a design system from a global perspective, but realized that the departments, there was too many different subdivisions to work on within a global library, because every time you create a new component, it needs to be pushed back into the design system, which means there needs to be a chain, there needs to be a process. And with any chain or any process, when there's other people who have to make those decisions, you end up getting bottlenecked, right? Which goes very much against what a design system should be, which is to be lean. And what Spotify did was they made smaller design systems that were paired to the bigger design system, which meant that the smaller design system could be a lot more agile. You could build quicker things, but they still had the DNA of the larger design system. And I think this is a very sensible way of doing it. So you can basically have your own team, so you can micromanage your own team. And as long as everybody understands that you need to be putting back into it and looking after it, nurturing it and taking care of it, it will continue to grow. Yeah, it'll continue to be a design system.
Okay, but how does a small team look like? I mean, is there like a UI designer, UX designer, a developer? Is that like the people you need to start, and then?
Yeah, I think what you initially need is commitment, right? So yeah, you can have the roles, but the roles also live on a different level. Okay, so on one side you have your project running, right? So within your project you have to make goals, right? You have to produce stuff. Okay, so you're building an app, you have certain objectives, you have to meet those within the sprints that you're working on and the features that you're building. But on top of that, there's a design system. Okay, so there's two levels, right? So one is maintaining the design system, which will ultimately be paired with a pattern library, for example. This needs to be worked on. This needs to be built upon.
Yeah, no, what I'm trying to get out of you is like, because again, I think a lot of people, they do not really know, you know, maybe they come from classic design, I don't know, like brand design or something like this, or graphic design. And maybe they like to go in more into, they heard about it, found it interesting, especially when you come from brand design and then think, okay, what does it need, you know, to get in there? Do I have to be, you know, can a brand designer be involved in that? Do I have to become a UI designer, or, you know, this?
I mean, a design system can be a behemoth, or it can be simply a guide within a smaller team, right? The main thing that a design system shouldn't do is get in the way. Okay, so when you're working with Deutsche Bahn, for example, this is a huge scale thing because you've got hundreds of people who are all dependent on this, and you have to try and find a way to make a design system liberating rather than a pain in the ass, right? Because it can quickly become that. So you need to have a process where you can have a safe space to challenge things and create things and build things. Where it becomes difficult is when you try and push those ideas back into a design system. Okay, so new features, you know, at what point do you say, okay, this becomes an official part of the design system? Yeah, this is when you have people like design operations or design system guardians, as I like to call them, who are kind of the gatekeepers to making sure that things actually, you know, make sense and actually benefit the design system and benefit the team. One thing that we always did, I think is always a really nice thing, is that we would have a push of new features or new components into a design system, just like a developer would if they're pushing out new code into a product. We would do exactly the same thing. So we'd have release cycles, which means inside the release cycles, you can then challenge things. You can test things, try things. And if they get through, once it's been validated by the user, for example, or it's gone into testing, you know you have something that's solid, then it actually has this validation that it has some use inside of a design system. It can be used on multiple occasions by multiple parties.
So with Deutsche Bahn, obviously they have like different apps, they have websites and, you know, tons of digital stuff where they need to look consistent and, you know, everything needs to feel like, okay, this is a Deutsche Bahn product.
Yeah.
So what do you think? I mean, for a company with that scale, I think it's necessary to think about a system for sure. But when you, I don't know, if you're thinking about, okay, we're building a corporate website, I mean, then that's, I assume that's a way too early to think about design system. So what would you say, at what point it makes really sense to think about building an actual design system? Does it has to be like a product, which is, you know, iterated and, you know, keeps on developing?
I would say so. I mean, this is what we talk a lot about as well, is how much does brand play a role in the experience, I think, a hell of a lot. And I'm sure you do too. This is why we started Hyperfocus. So I would say from the beginning, you should think about your principles, right? So I wouldn't get the idea of a pattern library and a design system mixed up. A pattern library is something that we use. This is when I'm talking about components that are part of a design system, the part of a bigger picture. There's so many things that are involved inside a design system, which can be culture, right? It can be your mission, your vision, your approach to something. It's not just about design. There's a whole philosophy and idea that can live inside of a design system. I think that's what's really interesting about the idea at the moment of what a design system can be, should be, and could be, because there's no real written rules, because these kind of projects are growing at the same time as new types of businesses are growing, or even older businesses are realizing that, you know, for them to be consistent across multiple platforms, across multiple channels, it makes sense to have a space, again, a central point of truth, that is a guiding light that everybody can feel like they're a part of.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say, to answer your question, from the beginning, it doesn't necessarily have to be documented. It's like with our process, you know, we aim towards something at the end. And at the end, we often say the end is the beginning, because that's when you actually start to use the tools that you've been enabled with. And thinking about culture and ideas, mission, vision, all these things all eventually become the starting point for the journey that you're going on, which is, I think, ultimately the design system. Pattern libraries and everything else are just like sums of the whole. They're parts of things that make the whole complete picture.
Okay. So starting with a brand management platform, for example, where you just, I don't know, make your logo accessible for everybody, is like the ultimate beginning of a design system, which then can grow to whatever the company needs in the future.
Exactly, yeah. And this thing is constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. And you know, this idea of a brand or design system, they're the same thing, really, to be honest. That it's a living, breathing thing that continues to develop over time. And I think that's what's super important when we talk about culture is a company needs to understand how to embrace that and develop with it, you know, because the brand of today and the design system of today will definitely not be the design system, the brand of tomorrow. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. Cool. All right. To wrap it up, I like to ask you one last question. Where do you see this whole thing going in the future? Where's that topic developing?
Design systems will play more and more of a role now that the vocabulary is commonplace. It starts to become a thing. You see it on the front covers of magazines. You can listen to many blogs. There's companies like Frontify, for example, that we've talked about, who have the whole business model built around these things. So I think it's a really interesting, exciting time for design systems as businesses start to realize the advantages and benefits of them. And I think, you know, in a remote world that we've been in for the last 2 years and will continue to be part of our working culture, it becomes more and more important that you have, it's almost like a virtual home, right? It's a space where you can go and all of those values, all of those things are there. So I see it's been a really exciting and interesting time for how we document and build collectively design systems. And I think this is going to be really interesting to see where that goes in the future. But I think it definitely has a bright future, and it's definitely not going anywhere. it's sticking around for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. All right, thanks, Paul. As always, it's very enlightened to talk to you about this kind of topic.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot for watching this video. If you like this kind of content, keep on having an eye on our channel. We will definitely talk about this topic more in the future. And yeah, it will always help if you like, subscribe, comment. We would really appreciate that, and that helps us to grow the channel and keep on doing stuff like that. So, thanks a lot. See you in the next one.